Welcome to Part 3, the final chapter. In Parts 1 and 2, we watched Carl Jung build, break, descend, and return. Now we watch him do the most extraordinary thing of all: die and come back. In February 1944, Jung suffered a heart attack and had visions so vivid, so real, that when he recovered, the ordinary world felt like a prison by comparison. What he saw changed everything he wrote for the rest of his life. And the ideas he left behind? They are still alive. In Star Wars. In your therapy session. In the word introvert. In every person who has ever tried to face their own darkness rather than run from it. This is where Carl Jung's story ends, and where its real power begins. Chapter 11. India and the Self. In late 1937, Jung sailed for India. He did not go there as a romantic seeker of Eastern wisdom, but as a psychologist who wanted to encounter a completely different understanding of consciousness. India had developed highly refined methods of inner exploration over thousands of years, and Jung wanted to experience them directly, as a test of his own discoveries against an ancient tradition. The Taj Mahal was his first great impression. Standing before it at dawn, Jung saw it as a monument to Eros, the principle of relationship. The Muslim ruler who built it, he felt, had understood something Christianity had forgotten. Love itself could become a road to the divine. The building's perfect symmetry made it feel like a mandala, a form expressing the union of masculine and feminine. Jung believed Islam had preserved an emotional warmth that Protestant Christianity had lost. At the stupa of Sanchi, he met a completely different spiritual world. The ancient Buddhist monument rose from the hill like thought made visible in stone. Here was the opposite of the Taj Mahal, not the path of relationship, but the solitary road toward enlightenment. The Buddha had left behind wife and child in order to find truth. He had let go of all attachment to reach nirvana. Jung felt the severity of this path, and also how foreign it was to Western psychology. In Calcutta, Jung fell seriously ill with dysentery. For 10 days he lay feverish and delirious in his hotel. During that illness, he had a dream that mattered deeply to him. He stood on an island off the coast of England. Before him was the Holy Grail, shining with light. A voice told him that this was the healing vessel Europe needed. When he woke, Jung understood that his task was not to import India's solutions into the West. Europe would have to discover its own path to wholeness. The Indians he encountered often puzzled him. They spoke of good and evil as different degrees of the same reality. Maya, illusion, made sharp distinctions ultimately unreliable. One holy man in Benares told Jung that Jesus and Satan were brothers, both sons of God. Jung's Western mind resisted this fiercely, and yet he could also see how this worldview helped people endure life's darkness without the crushing guilt that haunted Europeans. At the temple of Konarak, covered in erotic sculptures, Jung saw sexuality woven directly into religious life. The carvings presented every sexual act as part of divine play. Christianity had divided spirit from flesh, and in doing so created neurosis. Hinduism united them. But Jung also noticed a cost. The Indians seemed less individually developed, more completely embedded in collective tradition. Perhaps the most important part of the journey came through what Jung did not do. He deliberately avoided meeting any gurus. He did not visit Ramana Maharshi, even though they were in India at the same time. Jung knew he could easily be absorbed by a guru's influence and lose his Western critical balance. His own path required tension between consciousness and the unconscious. Eastern Enlightenment, in his view, dissolved that tension too completely. When Jung returned to Europe in 1938, he felt more certain of his direction. East and West, he believed, were complementary. The East had developed the inner life while neglecting the outer world. The West had mastered external reality while losing its soul. Neither path was enough by itself. Individuation meant holding both, refusing to escape into pure spirituality or pure materialism. Chapter 12: The Second World War and a Near-Death Vision. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Jung had sensed it coming for years through the dreams of his patients: fire, blood, ruined cities, and collapse. To him, the collective unconscious had been warning of catastrophe long before it arrived. Now the war was real. Jung felt it physically. His chest tightened. Sleep became harder. Switzerland was surrounded by fascist powers, and after France fell in 1940, Jung's name appeared on a Nazi blacklist. Swiss authorities urged him to leave Zurich and hide in the mountains. German agents were active near the borders. Kidnapping or assassination was a real possibility. Jung refused to go. He would remain with his patients, his family, and his work. If the Nazis came, they came. He treated refugees who crossed into Switzerland. Their stories were like pieces of hell: camps, deportations, and neighbors disappearing in the night. Jung saw the shadow archetype operating on a huge historical scale. Everything Europe had failed to acknowledge within itself was being projected outward and destroyed. The culture Germans who read Goethe were building extermination camps. Civilization was only a thin crust over chaos. His son Franz was called up for military service. Swiss troops guarded the borders, while invasion seemed possible at any moment. Emma prepared the house for siege: blackout curtains, food stores, evacuation plans. Jung kept seeing patients, many of whom were having apocalyptic dreams. The line between inner catastrophe and outer catastrophe blurred. Private neurosis now felt small beside collective madness. Then, in February 1944, Jung slipped on ice outside his house, broke his leg, and then suffered heart failure. For 3 weeks, he hovered between life and death. During that time, he had visions that changed him permanently. He found himself far above the earth. Below him floated the planet, lit in blue, with the Arabian Desert, the Himalayas, and the Mediterranean visible across its surface. Then a dark stone temple appeared in space. Jung knew all his questions would be answered there. He was about to enter it when a figure appeared in the form of the ancient Greek healer Asclepius. The message was simple. He had to return. People still needed him on Earth. Jung felt deep disappointment. The vision had seemed more real than ordinary life, and the idea of returning meant going back into the whole strange theater of earthly existence. For weeks after recovering, he could barely tolerate daylight. The world felt like a prison. But gradually something shifted. He began to experience what he called the mysterium conjunctionis, the sacred union of opposites. Day and night seemed fused in eternal light. The nurse who cared for him later said his room appeared to glow. Jung understood something that went beyond theory. The self was real, more real than the ego. Death was not an ending, but a passage. When he was strong enough to work again, his writing changed. The urgency was gone, replaced by certainty. He had touched something beyond argument or proof, and the rest of his life would be spent trying to give that experience form. The war ended in May 1945. Europe lay in ruins. But Jung had seen from his cosmic height that destruction and creation were part of a larger pattern. Rebuilding souls would be harder than rebuilding cities. Chapter 13. Reaping the Harvest, Ion and Answer to Job. After his near-death experience, Jung wrote with greater freedom. He no longer tried to persuade anyone. He simply recorded what he had learned. His first major work of this later period was Ion, published in 1951. In it, he traced the symbols of the self through 2,000 years of Christian history. Jung showed how Christ functioned as a symbol of the self for Western civilization, but only as a partial one. Christ represented light, goodness, and perfection. That one-sidedness inevitably produced a shadow. The figure of the Antichrist emerged as a psychological necessity. Whatever was excluded from the divine image had to appear somewhere. The Book of Revelation showed this process clearly. Divine wrath, destruction, the beast rising from the sea, these were all returns of what had been repressed. If absolute goodness became the ideal, then absolute evil had to arise as its counterpart. Jung linked this to the astrological age of Pisces, the two fish moving in opposite directions. Christianity had divided reality into irreconcilable opposites: God and devil, spirit and flesh, good and evil. That split gave Western civilization energy and momentum, but it also created deep psychological conflict. The coming age of Aquarius, Jung suggested, would demand the integration of opposites. Humanity would have to face its shadow or risk self-destruction.
While writing Aeon, Jung felt drawn to something even more personal. For decades, he had carried the problem of divine darkness inside him. The childhood vision of God defecating on Basel Cathedral had never left him. In 1952, he wrote Answer to Job in a burst of intense concentration, as though the unconscious itself were dictating it to him. The book was theological dynamite. Jung argued that in the book of Job, God revealed himself as unconscious. Yahweh tormented his faithful servant in a wager with Satan, acting like a tyrant who demanded worship while inflicting suffering. Job, by contrast, held on to his integrity in the face of divine injustice. That struggle, Jung believed, forced God toward consciousness. God had to become human in Christ in order to develop moral awareness. But even that incarnation was incomplete. Christ was sinless and therefore not fully human. The crucifixion, Jung argued, was not a simple redemption of humanity. It was part of God's effort to confront his own guilt toward Job. The real transformation, Jung believed, would come when ordinary human beings became conscious of both their divinity and their darkness. Every person who achieved this kind of awareness helped God become conscious. That, to Jung, was the meaning of the Holy Spirit working through humanity. The book scandalized theologians. Jung was accused of blasphemy, madness, and inflation. He did not care. He had written what had tormented him since childhood. The question of evil could not be solved by theology alone. It had to be lived, suffered, and integrated. Every person who faced their own capacity for evil without being destroyed by it contributed to the transformation of the God image. These works exhausted Jung, but he was in his 70s and aware of his mortality. Still, he had said what he needed to say. The Western image of God was changing. The split between good and evil was being healed not by institutions, but by individuals doing inner work. Every person who integrated the shadow, every person who united opposites, took part in the continuing incarnation. The work Jung had begun in his confrontation with the unconscious was now bearing fruit for humanity. Chapter 14. The Final Conjunction. The 1950s brought a series of losses that went straight to the heart. In March 1953, Toni Wolff died suddenly. She had been Jung's colleague, collaborator, and companion for 40 years. Her death left him physically unwell for months. She had understood parts of him that no one else could reach, and her insight had helped shape his thinking about psychological types. With her death, that particular conversation came to an end. 2 years later came an even harder blow. In 1955, Emma fell ill. The diagnosis was cancer. For 52 years, she had been Jung's anchor, raising their 5 children while he descended into the unconscious. She had lived inside his psychology from the beginning and eventually became an analyst herself. Her work on the Grail legend would be published after her death. On November 27th, she died, and Jung later called it the greatest loss of his life. He turned grief into stone. At Bollingen, he carved tablets bearing the names of his ancestors on both his father's and mother's sides, reaching back through generations. This work connected him to what he called the impersonal karma of the family line. A human life was brief, but the ancestral current continued to move. He was only one temporary form taken by a much larger and older process. Even after those losses, Jung completed his great work, Mysterium Coniunctionis, in 1955. The book stretched across 700 pages and explored the alchemical symbolism of the union of opposites. Jung showed how the alchemists projected inner psychological processes onto chemical operations. When they wrote about sulfur and mercury joining to form the philosopher's stone, they were really describing consciousness uniting with the unconscious in order to create wholeness. The alchemists, Jung believed, knew something Christianity had forgotten. Transformation requires darkness. The prima materia, the starting point of the work, was not found in purity, but in filth, in what had been rejected. One had to descend into the shadow, confront and integrate what had been denied, and only then rise toward consciousness. The philosopher's stone was not perfection. It was completeness. It contained light and dark, masculine and feminine, spirit and matter. In his later essays, Jung turned his attention toward the future of humanity. In The Undiscovered Self, published in 1957, he warned against mass-mindedness. Television, advertising, and political propaganda were producing conformity, and individuals were dissolving into statistics. The only defense against collective possession, he argued, was self-knowledge. A person who understood their own shadow could not be so easily manipulated by demagogues. Flying saucers fascinated Jung during this period, but not because he believed they were literal alien craft. He saw them as projections. Modern humanity, having lost its religious symbols, was projecting wholeness onto technological images. The glowing discs descending from above, bringing superior beings, were modern mandalas, desperate attempts by the psyche to express unity in an age that had lost the sacred. By 1960, Jung was 85. His body was weakening, but his mind remained clear. He gave his final interview to the BBC. When asked whether he believed in God, he paused and said he did not need to believe. He knew. For Jung, that was not faith, but observation. He had experienced the reality of the psyche and its objective existence beyond the personal mind. Whether one called it God, self, or the collective unconscious did not matter. The reality remained. Chapter 15. Back to the rhizome. In 1960, Jung had a dream that would shape his final act. He stood in a large public space, speaking to a crowd that understood him. For decades, his ideas had lived in analytical journals and specialized books. But the dream suggested something different. The collective unconscious was ready to receive what he had discovered. When BBC producer John Freeman approached him about writing a popular book explaining his psychology, Jung first refused. Then the dream returned, stronger than before. He called Freeman back, and the project became Man and His Symbols. It was Jung's effort to speak directly to ordinary readers about the reality of the psyche. He chose his collaborators carefully, selecting people who had already lived with his ideas for years through their own inner work. As he wrote through 1961, his body failed, but his mind stayed sharp. Jung knew the book was his testament. 10 days before his death, he finished his chapter. The timing felt as though the same forces he had studied for 60 years had guided it. Those final weeks brought dreams of unusual beauty. He saw a large, round stone inscribed with words about wholeness and unity, and he dreamed of trees whose roots were golden threads rising from the earth and surrounding him with light. Jung had often compared human life to a plant living on its rhizome. The visible part lasts only one season, while the root remains. On June 6, 1961, Carl Jung died peacefully in Kusnacht. His flowering was complete, and the essential pattern returned to the eternal ground from which new growth would emerge. What happened next surprised everyone, including Jung's closest collaborators. His ideas, once limited to analytical circles, began spreading through culture like water finding its level. Joseph Campbell had already translated Jung's insights about myth into a language artists and writers could use. The Hero with 1,000 Faces showed how the stories of every culture followed the same archetypal structure Jung had identified. The hero enters darkness and returns with treasure for the community. That was not just literary analysis. It became a map of transformation that George Lucas would later use in Star Wars, introducing millions to Jungian ideas without their realizing it. The therapeutic world also discovered that Jung had explored terrain Freud never reached. Freud had explained neurosis through personal history. Jung offered a broader story that included meaning, purpose, and spiritual development. Alcoholics Anonymous had already absorbed Jung's insight that addiction was spiritual thirst misdirected, and its 12-step program reflected essentially Jungian principles. Surrender to a higher power meant acknowledging forces beyond the ego. Making amends meant shadow integration. The program worked because it was individuation translated into language people could live with. The counterculture of the 1960s found in Jung what it could not find in Freud or behaviorism: a psychology that respected direct experience over institutional authority. At a time when academic psychology often reduced consciousness to stimulus and response, Jung had shown that psyche contained depths no system could fully measure or control. The human potential movement at Esalen grew directly from Jungian foundations. The idea that each person carries hidden possibilities waiting to be realized comes straight from Jung's concept of individuation. Women in particular responded to his refusal to define feminine psychology as lack or deficiency. His concept of anima allowed men to acknowledge their feminine side without shame, while his concept of animus helped women claim masculine strength without apology. Marion Woodman later developed this into a psychology of the feminine body, showing how women's symptoms often expressed unlived life. Clarissa Pinkola Estes used Jungian ideas to read fairy tales as maps of feminine individuation, and Women Who Run with the Wolves reached millions who had never heard Jung's name, but recognized their own experience in his archetypal patterns. Even the hard sciences began finding echoes of what Jung had seen through introspection. Wolfgang Pauli, the physicist who had been Jung's patient and collaborator, showed that quantum mechanics suggested a reality closer to Jung's synchronicity than to Newton's clockwork universe. Consciousness seemed to affect matter at the quantum level, implying that psyche and physics might be different aspects of the same reality. Neuroscience later found that mythic symbols activated ancient brain structures, suggesting that archetypes may be deeply rooted patterns shaped over millennia of human experience. But Jung's deepest legacy was the transformation of how Western culture understood evil. Before Jung, evil was usually seen as either sin that required punishment or sickness that required treatment. Jung showed that evil was shadow, the rejected parts of the personality projected onto others. That understanding offered hope where theology and medicine had offered only control. If evil was projection, it could be withdrawn. If enemies carried our shadows, we could reclaim those projections and interrupt the cycle of hatred. That insight would become especially important in a world armed with the power to destroy itself while still driven by tribal psychology. Today, Jung's language has entered everyday speech so completely that people often forget where it came from. People speak of complexes, introverts and extroverts, shadows and personas, without realizing these were Jung's discoveries. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, based on Jung's psychological types, helps millions understand that difference does not mean deficiency. Dream work, active imagination, and sand play therapy all offer ways to access unconscious wisdom. The idea that symptoms have meaning, that crisis can become transformation, that the second half of life has different tasks from the first, all come from Jung. The rhizome Jung returned to in death continues to produce new growth. His ideas keep flowering in fields he never imagined: ecology, artificial intelligence, religious studies, pop culture. Each generation finds in Jung what it needs for its own crisis. His central insight remains unchanged. The psyche is real. It has a purpose beyond personal pleasure, and conscious relationship with it is the great work of human life. Jung did not build a school or create a dogma. He opened a door and said, "Look for yourself." Millions have done exactly that and continue to do it, finding in their own depths what Jung found in his. The pool of life he glimpsed in that Liverpool dream still reflects new light as humanity continues its long journey toward consciousness. Carl Jung descended into madness and brought back a map. He broke from the most powerful man in psychology and found something truer. He built a tower with his own hands, died for 3 weeks, and returned changed. And when he finally let go, peacefully, in Kusnacht, on June 6, 1961, he didn't disappear. He became the root, the rhizome, the part that outlasts the flower. His words are in your therapy session. His archetypes shaped Star Wars. His ideas run through Alcoholics Anonymous, through every person who has ever said, "I need to face my shadow." Jung opened a door and said, "Look for yourself." If this series moved you, share it with someone who's brave enough to look inside. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because history's dark biographies has many more stories like this one waiting for you.